Hello, and welcome to this webinar on building business resiliency in the face of extreme events. It's brought to you by Risk.net and Inuit. I'm Stella Farrington, Head of Content at Energy Risk, which is a Risk.net brand. So we're going to start by discussing a recent and very extreme event, the Texas freeze. We'll be looking at what companies did to survive the disruption and the whipsawing prices of the time, and what lessons individual firms can take from it and apply to building business resiliency more generally and to managing volatility in the future. With extreme events seemingly becoming more frequent and more severe, we'll be asking whether the definition of extreme events and the discipline of managing tail risk needs to change or be revisited. So joining me to discuss these and other issues, we have an extremely knowledgeable panel. So I'm delighted to introduce them now. In no particular order, we have Erika Bierschbach, who is Vice President, Energy Market Operations and Resource Planning at Austin Energy. She's joined by Rebecca Bollenbach, who is a partner at Essentia Advisory Partners. Next, we have Robert Belinsky, who is Vice President, Services at Inuit. Firdosh Patel, who is a Business Solution Architect at Inuit. And the panel is completed by Mitesh Doshi, who is the Chief Risk Officer at Trailstone. So welcome to all of you. So just to tell the audience at this point, if you have any questions for the panelists, just please type them into the chat box as they occur to you. There's no need to wait until the end. We'll address them as and when they come up. So we're going to start by focusing on, as I said, the Texas freeze. So 3 severe weather storms sweeping across the United States in February this year, leading to massive electricity generation failure, millions left without power for several days, resulting in a number of deaths, many deaths, and a number of very well-established firms having to file for bankruptcy. And at some point, electricity prices spiked as high as $9,000 per megawatt hour. So I wanted to put the first question, if I may please, to Erika. Erika, Austin Energy operated throughout that time. Could you describe what that was like? What was the biggest challenge you faced, and what do you think enabled you to get through it?
Good afternoon, Stella. Thank you for having me. Uri was a very interesting, unique event that we went through, that the whole state went through. And when it comes to this particular one, this past February, our biggest challenge came down to the fact that so much of our critical infrastructure was hit and was down. This critical infrastructure is all interrelated. And the fact that so many parts of it were compromised throughout the state was a huge challenge. We had communications, internal, external, that were down or damaged. Water, which plants run off of, had issues across the board, for not only for power plants, but in homes and businesses. Transportation, again, compromised, not reliable or unavailable. So, one thing that, I think we did, and I think, not unlike some of, my colleague, other organizations, but it was interesting to later find out how others maybe didn't fare as well. We had an incident command set up that ran around the clock online for many hours. Of course, many of us, there was a fair amount of us that were at home already, right, during the pandemic. But we have, being a utility, we had a good 15% of our staff and employees, in the office, in the control rooms, on the trade floor, and then, of course, linemen out and the field crew. So this incident command that was set up Sunday night, that would have been the 14th, before STP tripped. That was set up around the clock, like I said, for days, actually a total of 3 weeks, where many roles were represented in the organization. Like I said, we understand there were operators across the state.
Was it following a strategy, a policy that was already in place for what happens if something like this happens? Or was it something that had to be thought of more on the hoof, as it were?
So I will say that, all of our organizations have business continuity plans. This being as extreme as it was, we actually had, some recent talent that joined the organization from the Northeast that had, is very, very aware of, the kind of blackouts that they experienced. We, of course, here in Texas are very familiar with the hurricanes and so forth that occur. But so I would say there was some tweaking because so many people were at home. And so, the fact that we had this, essentially this online incident command that normally would have been done physically in an actual, building, was done virtually. And it was very surreal. It was very interesting. We had, like I said, every role represented. There might have been 70 or 80 people on the call at one time. And the fact that we could actually function and do business and meet each other's needs was very interesting, and it worked actually very well. We found out later that there were operators across the state that were unaware of some of the struggles and challenges ERCOT was going through to keep the grid from going dark, and they made decisions not knowing the severity of what we were facing or consequences of their actions. So that was interesting to us because, we compare notes, we do lessons learned. And, that setup really, I think, helped us, with all of the, the many things that we all faced throughout that week. So I would say that was really, if I had to pick one, because there's a long list, that would be just dealing with the compromised infrastructure, and then that some of us were able to meet this challenge better than others.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Mitesh, could I bring you in here, please? And could you talk a little bit about, the Texas freeze was obviously very difficult for asset owners who weren't able to run their assets. And that wasn't just conventional generators, but renewable firms as well, with wind turbines freezing, etc. What sort of challenges did you see asset owners facing in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me as well. I appreciate it. Extending the topic that Erica kind of was mentioning about the Northeast and how they were able to manage, or they are able to manage, blackouts so much better than ERCOT. And plus, if you kind of remember, ERCOT has been going through extremely low reserve margins for a couple of years. So another thing that I want to point out is just at the end of January, February was trading more about $24. And as soon as basically the second week began, prices were basically looking at $9,000. So it came pretty quickly, and not a lot of people were prepared for such an event. As far as the renewables are concerned, or any generation asset is concerned, most of them are basically trying to provide financial stability to their investors by providing some sort of a hedge, maybe 1 year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, etc. So before they get into cash month, most of these asset providers, especially like the ones who are actually going to be producing, unlike wind and some of the other ones, who actually have a really high load profile. That's basically looking at 80 to 90% hedged, before we get into cash. And those turbines or those wind or those generation assets, if they're not going to be performing well, in cash, the prices are looking at $9,000. They're going to be they will have to buy those hedges back at $9,000, basically, losing all the risk premium that they've collected by hedging in the forward market. They're losing pretty much everything and more, a lot more than that. So managing volatility is becoming more and more important for not only asset owners, load providers, at the same time traders as well. And how do we do that? It's kind of becoming extremely critical. We can get into more details of how we can actually do that. And it's important for each and every asset owner to kind of keep an eye on not only fundamentals, but at the same time, what could potentially go wrong if something really abnormal happens in the market.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So could I move on to Rebecca for your impressions around that time? You work with an array of firms across the sector, so you were presumably seeing various different challenges at different companies. Can you talk about what you were seeing over this period?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you so much for inviting us to participate. Happy to be here. We are an advisory firm serving a very diverse group of energy clients in both power and gas, but I thought that I would bring up, as a part of this subject, some impacts that probably were not quite as publicized. I'm here in Houston, and we were certainly going through our own huge challenges here in ERCOT, both on the power and gas side. But our firm essentially supports a group of cross-border clients and clients in Mexico who are both industrials that depend on gas supply, as well as generators that depend on this. And I think one of the lesser-known effects of this was that, the exports going into Mexico on any given day in February are going to ramp at about 4 to 4.2 BCF. In the summertime, that goes up to 5.5 BCF. About 3/4 of that gas normally comes from Texas basins. During this freeze, when gas became constrained, we both had physical problems and what I would call almost political issues starting at about that Tuesday or Wednesday, as Governor Abbott and others were trying to figure out what are the best ways to publicly address this crisis. Governor Abbott, on February the 17th, actually made an announcement that all of the gas that was needed by power plants needed to stay in Texas, and made a statement. Well, I'm not sure that you could call it a ruling, because there was a lot of comment from the Road Commission and so forth regarding the ability of the governor to make a rule of this type, but certainly a suggestion at the least that all the gas would stay in Texas, which would cut Mexico exports. As a result of that, when the exports to Texas dropped in Mexico, they lost power in 26 states in Mexico. There were millions and millions of people without power, similar to Texas. Now, most of Mexico wasn't facing the type of temperature drops that we were experiencing in Texas, but it was a massive event in Mexico. They lost over 1/3 of the mainland generation. They had rolling blackouts, not just in the north, based on the way that the grid is constructed there in the mainland. There was power outages in Cancun based on the Texas freeze. We took the power out in Cancun. Yes, we did. And, certainly the financial impacts, there were close to $3 billion of financial impacts in terms of industry shutting down, factories shutting down. So there was a huge impact on our biggest trade partner, both politically, physically, and I think looking forward to managing events like this in the future, we had a huge lesson learned on both sides of the border, going all the way up to our own State Department and theirs, which is we really are not an island unto ourselves when it comes to these situations. What's happening in Texas is going to have a big impact, both to our northern neighbors in SVP, Entergy, over to the Louisiana side and south of Mexico. Just because our grid is isolated in Texas right now, except for a few DC ties, doesn't mean that our natural gas infrastructure is not going to have massive impacts on millions of people outside of the state of Texas. So, I think some key points looking forward would be better collaboration between both of the governments to when we foresee these things that are potential issues coming down a week beforehand. Certainly coordination in terms of planning on the Mexico side for LNG and other backup type of fuels. And, conservation messaging is the third, which is, on both sides of the border, if we see this getting tight, to be early and be insistent about conservation messaging for both power and gas so that we can keep the grid stable.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Rebecca. I think that's a really good point about how far this actually stretched and how many businesses were impacted by it. And as Mitesh said, we'll come back to look at more detail in how companies can actually risk manage some of these. When you've got these huge exogenous factors, how much leeway does a firm have when it comes to, risk management techniques to actually sort of get on top of some of these things? So thank you for that. Let me move on now to Robert, please. And like Rebecca, you also work with a variety of clients. So could you talk about, I'm guessing in any kind of crisis, that it often starts off, one of the biggest challenges is getting some sort of transparency into it, into finding out what's going on. You know, what sort of issues did you see firms facing in terms of getting access to data that they actually needed to understand what was going on?
Sure. So thanks again, Stella, for inviting us and you to be part of this presentation. Excited to be here. But you know, in particular, one of our customers, they had quite a few traders and schedulers here in the Houston area. And so when the power went out, you know, it wasn't just power; it was also cell phone service, and you know, pretty much isolated this group down here in Texas. They did not have any capability to, you know, look into a system and to be able to manage their positions in a real-time type of format. So they literally handed that off to one of their branches, one of their other offices in out west, who you know, didn't have a power outage, but also had complete access to the system. So they were able to run reports, take a look at exposures of the various pipelines that were impacted in, you know, throughout the central U.S. and, you know, seamlessly, you know, transition the activity from the group of people who've been scheduling throughout Texas and that to the other groups. And, you know, in effect, you did not have that overall risk and exposure because they were able to look at their positions, knew which customers were failing them, you know, had a capability to look at counterparty risk, dial back some of their exposure to some customers that they felt may not be the best risk in this type of environment because they were being forced to buy, you know, expensive gas and turn around and sell it for, you know, not the equivalent in the energy side, in the electricity side. So there was concerns about who was going to be able to pay for all this gas that was being delivered. So, you know, having that real-time view with a system such as Entrade that, you know, allowed you to just seamlessly hand off the delegation of authorities from one group to another, and they were able to pick it up and run with it and actually still maintain not only the business, but, you know, trade around opportunities that were happening because, you know, as Rebecca mentioned, when Governor Abbott shut off the gas leaving Texas, that impacted a lot of gas deliveries all the way up to Minnesota, right? And so there were opportunities to trade and deliver gas in Minnesota, which all of a sudden became very expensive because they were anticipating receiving gas from Texas. So there were, you know, like any, you know, I don't want to bring it up, but an event like this, you know, for many traders, it's an opportunity, right? Because volatility is spiking. And if you're able to understand your positions, your exposures, and what counterparties you could really do business with, it actually opens up opportunities to profit in this environment.
Yeah. So it sounds like they were almost able to open up the equivalent of a disaster recovery center, but with completely different people in a different part of the country.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And this was not something. This wasn't part of their regular plan. That, you know, they typically, you know, they're like, they bring their computers home, their disaster recoveries. I'm going to be able to work from home and be able to access the internet, be able to access my, you know, system and positions, and all that was shut down. So they really had to do it on the fly. Yeah.
And I'm guessing one of the big parts was sort of permissioning people to be able to do that, because that's, you know, a big part of what people are able to do, isn't it? You know, they need to be able to have those permissions passed over to other people before
permissions,
the other people
and also
can take
an understanding
over.
of the market. Yeah, understanding of the various market areas. If you're used to scheduling gas on the West Coast, it's not exactly the same as, you know, the same customers you'd be dealing with in Texas. So, you know, having that information and being able to filter the system to pick that up and not have to, you know, rely on being able to talk to somebody from the Houston office, which wasn't available. You know, they were completely isolated. No phone, no internet, no power, no things, right? So. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Firdos, could I bring you in here now? And could you talk us through some of the ways that you sort of managed to help firms at this time, thinking of things like stress testing, scenario analysis? Were those the sort of things that you talked about with customers?
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon, Stella. Thank you for having me as part of this panel. So as Robert mentioned, right, our clients, our primary focus was to ensure that our clients had whatever data they needed to make the decisions in a very timely manner. And one of the tools that we have in our system is scenario testing and stress testing. So as Mitesh pointed out earlier, right, clients need to be able to manage volatility. And extreme events obviously cause extreme volatilities. So what does stress testing do? So stress testing, think of your forward curves, which all clients have. You need your forward curves to mark your positions to the market. And every forward curve has grid points or prices, and the prices can be daily prices, weekly prices, monthly prices. And so within our system, we have the ability of stress testing your portfolios. And that's what we were trying to assist our clients with, so that they could see how their risk profile, their P&L, their cash flow projections, etc., would change depending upon different extreme price scenarios, right? So the one thing I would like to highlight, in addition to whatever Robert and Mitesh said on this front, is typically we see companies use, the standard tools in their toolkit, right? There's physical position management, there's price exposure management, there is P&L cash flow focus, there's credit risk, VAR, value at risk. But one of the areas we believe is extremely helpful to clients, especially for extreme events, is stress testing, because that is where you're getting into the tail end of the distribution, right? It's all well said and done that, well, we're focusing on 99.9% of the scenarios and we'll be okay. But that 0.01% of that tail is what can be truly devastating. So we were very focused on helping the clients make sure that they had access to the data and were able to stress test their portfolios as and when needed.
Thank you. So we've been talking about the Texas freeze, but really that's just that's an example of a very extreme event in a world perhaps where there are more extreme events to be expected, perhaps more frequently, perhaps more severe when they occur. So I want to look now in more detail at how firms might deal with this potential increase in severe events. And I wanted to start this section of the webinar with a poll question, please. And this is for you, the audience, to put your answers in. So if we could have that question put up on the screen, and you should all be able to see it now. And please, could you just tick which answer is the more appropriate for you? So the question is, how does your firm intend to address the risk that it might be hit with more frequent and more severe weather events in the future? And the possible answers are, we don't expect any meaningful increase in severe weather events to impact our business over the next few years. And I guess that might be because you don't expect an increase, or you just don't expect it to impact your business. We are in the early stages of analysing whether the risk of damage to our business from severe weather events is likely to increase in the next few years, or we undertake regular risk reviews to understand what an increase in severe weather events would mean for our business. And I wanted to turn to Erica first, if I may, please, to get you to comment on the answers to that as they come in. So could we start to see, is there some answers coming into that now? Let's have a look. Okay, so yes, here we are. So it's saying 11% of people are saying that they don't expect any meaningful increase, whereas it's split 44% between the other two answers. So Erica, what do you think on that? I was expecting a small number to be saying that they don't expect any meaningful increase. I actually thought that was fairly high, 11%, but what do you think?
So here in Texas, I think there's some, I don't want to say it's differing views. I think one of the things we did hear that came out of all of the legislature and the hearings is that you had some part of the the environment, I guess, or the energy industry here in Texas that, you know, are looking at climate change more seriously. So you will maybe have heard that in certain congressmen's, you know, statements and stuff like that. I think that, you know, seasoned, whether it's, you know, IPPs, whether it's, you know, the majors, whether it's banks, whether it's, you know, public power. I think the people who are seasoned, who have been here, who, you know, who thrive in this environment, I think, you know, they take these weather events very seriously. You know, we undergo regular reviews. We have, you know, when I came to Austin Energy, the reason I came is because SB 7 had allowed derivatives to be used by government entities, and I fought for weather derivatives to be included in that. They, you know, that was actually the one item that they wouldn't allow us to trade, and so, you know, that's another item that we have pushed, you know, kind of, you know, whenever opportunities arise for us to be able to use those instruments. So I think, you know, it really depends on the audience. And I think that, you know, a state like ours, you know, we have so many resources. Our renewable resources are really penetrating, you know, more than, you know, than in any other state, you know, aside California, that we have to look at these very seriously.
Yeah, thank you. Mitesh, can I ask you to comment on the question and the answers, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure if as a risk manager, I would ever say that I don't expect a certain event to ever happen. There's always a probability of certain things to happen, especially in the energy industry. Power is something you can't really store. So if there's any disruption in either demand or supply-demand imbalance is going to cause disruption, and that is going to cause increase in volatility. And firms, whether it's, like I said, load entities or generation assets or prop trading firms, whatever you are, you know, whatever kind of business you are in, you need to learn to kind of manage volatility and learn how to manage your company and your position or whatever it might be, given a certain kind of a disruption. A disruption can really come from anywhere. I mean, we are talking about weather events, but it could really be literally anything. COVID-19 was one of the disruption that actually caused in March of 2020 as well. That did lead to an increase in a reduction in commercial demand, but an increase in residential demand, and so on and so forth, and the impact on prices, etc. So I would motivate every single firm to kind of look into their risk management systems, tools, techniques, and identify if there is a way to better manage volatility if at all there is a spike. Most of that is going to come in cash. Some of that is going to come in the forward markets as well if it's a regulatory event. But it's extremely important to kind of manage these these extreme events, which generally leads to high volatility. That's what I would like to say.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Rebecca, what are you seeing people do in terms of, you know, the analysis around whether these events are going to be more frequent and more severe?
Yeah, certainly as clients have come to us to ask us what are, you know, in order to look at their entire both operational and systems landscape, we do, you know, this is a huge wake-up call, not just for Texas, but I think for all the Americas, even globally in some level, that we can have extreme events, and the preparation for that can be boiled down as a company into what we can control and what we cannot control. We may not, in some of these future severe events, be able to control whether or not you've got power at your core facility, whether or not your main trader is going to have cell phone service in that extreme event. But you can control your disaster recovery plan. You can control walking through the different scenarios. You can control the type of systems and platforms that you have in place to manage that and to proactively run those scenarios. There's one other aspect of this that I wanted to add on to what Robert mentioned about having robust systems in place. Is one of the things that we noticed from clients in the aftermath of all this is there are huge financial positions at stake when the fur is flying and you're in the middle of this situation and traders are trying to do the best they can for their company and for their downstream clients, right, to procure supply and create deals. And if there are disputes after the fact, it is critical that you have a trading or risk management system that allows you to go back and audit exactly what happened, when it happened, who did what when for these types of transactions, because disputes have arisen, tremendous disputes have arisen worth hundreds of millions of dollars in the wake of this. And those clients of ours that are relying on their trading and risk management systems, they have that audit trail to lean back on in those legal disputes. So I'd say that is one thing that's under their control that's really important.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Robert, would you like to comment on this one?
Sorry, just taking myself off of mute. And honestly, I don't know if I could add anything else, to the comments of the others. I mean, I think definitely the view of the world has changed, and between Harvey and now this, only a couple of short years later. Of course, Harvey was much more regional, right? It really just impacted a lot of Houston, but this next one, having impacted all of Texas, I think is causing a lot of people to go back and look at not just their business continuity plans, but how do I measure, as Firdosh brought up, how do I measure that small tail at the end, so that if it does happen, it doesn't bankrupt the company, right? And what can I do to possibly mitigate that risk? And the answer may be nothing, but at least if you have that understanding of what that is, any type of planning you can do for it is better than just hoping for the best and hoping that it doesn't happen.
Yes, yeah. Okay, thank you. And Firdosh, have you got anything to add there?
Essentially, again, all the panelists have touched upon it. I think the key is systemic risk, right? I think that's the key that we are looking at, right? If you think of risks, the traditional viewpoint of risks is always risks that you can manage, risks that you cannot totally manage, right? So risk that is within your control that you can manage, people are already on top of it, companies are on top of it. But the very nature of our economies, the very nature of the global economy. So Rebecca touched on this, right? Rebecca talked about how Mexico was impacted when this happened in Texas, right? It's systemic risk, right? And the problem with systemic risk is it's very hard to predict and it's very hard to quantify. So from my standpoint, the systemic risk aspect is something that companies need to be aware of. Companies need to realize that in an environment where everything is so intertwined, right? Gas and power being so intertwined, especially in winter in Texas, right? The world economy being so intertwined, systemic risk is here to stay. And although we cannot quantify it and predict it accurately, you at least need to put in safeguards, right? So obviously, number one to me is data. Make sure you're modeling your data accurately in your systems. Make sure you're staying on top of your data. Make sure you're running all kinds of scenario analysis as much as possible. But the other side of it is also, what do you do when it happens? And I think Erica touched on it, right? You need to have a business continuity plan. You need a business continuity plan. Cannot overemphasize that enough. Business continuity plan has so many aspects to it, right? Who takes the critical decisions when these things happen? How can you take decisions quickly? Do you need to make tactical shifts in your portfolio depending upon what scenario happens? Robert touched upon how people need to be cross-trained, right? What if there are schedulers who are only scheduling in one part of the US? Suddenly this happens and they need to cover for schedulers across another part of the US. So to me, I think the one big takeaway for me is focusing on the fact that systemic risk exists, and you need to be on top of your data, and you need to also have a business continuity plan that says, in the event an extreme event happens, what are all the things that we can do, and also what is a backup plan? Because no matter what you plan to do, things do fall apart. So you need to have a worst case scenario and how you respond to it.
Yes, yeah. And can I just ask you a bit on systemic risk? Do you think firms are enough aware of where they sit in the system, what the possible systemic risks could be to them?
Personally, it's kind of hard. I don't know how much clients are aware of systemic risk. I think they probably, as Mitesh said, right, they probably are aware that extreme events will happen, right? As a risk manager, you know that extreme events will happen. And we are seeing extreme events happen more frequently than the term extreme would imply, right? I think it's much harder. It's very easy to tell people what is your price exposure risk, because you can see it on a report, and then you can go and hedge that price risk away. With systemic risk, you don't know what you don't know. That is the biggest risk. So because it's very hard to predict, right? Who would have predicted in Mexico that, hey, because of a certain situation in Texas, you guys are going to be, in a crisis, right? It's very hard for them to predict that and manage it. So I think companies at least need to be aware that systemic risk is increasing. It does exist. And you need to have plans in place to deal with it when it happens.
Yeah.
Can I just add one more thing to that?
Please go ahead, Mitesh.
Yeah, so there are two aspects of managing something which is out of risk manager's control to a certain extent. Number one, if the distribution of your underlying portfolio is normal in nature, there are many risk management tools available out there, VAR, and a lot of other ones as well. You can manage a normal distribution pretty easily. Managing a log normal distribution or managing normal distribution with lots of jumps in it is something where we get into issues where, oh my God, what just happened? To avoid, oh my God, what just happened, is where you need to identify tools and techniques to really understand where exactly those jumps are going to come from, what happens if it does come, what sort of my upside downside scenario looks like stressing to a certain extent as well. Identifying your log normal nature of your portfolio. Are you going to be short power if in case something like that happens? If you're really going to be short power, you're going to be on the wrong side of that log normal distribution, and that's something you need to address. And number two, many a times, especially as an asset owner, I hedge my power price, let's say ERCOT, at $40. I'm happy, but I know Houston Ship Channel hasn't done anything for a million years and probably not going to do anything. So I'm not going to hedge my Houston Ship Channel. I'm going to buy that in cash, but I've hedged my power. All of a sudden, a winter like February happens and your power is hedged, your gas isn't. You are now in a catch-22. You buy gas at $400, or you basically buy back or your power at $9,000. Either way, you're going to be losing a lot of money. So if you're hedged, truly identify if you're really, really hedged, or if you're not, if you're just dirty hedged by just hedging one side of the portfolio and not really hedging the other side of the portfolio at the same time. Risk management really needs to look into those specific details as well to identify if you're really hedged, are you really hedged and how much?
Yes, yeah.
Agreed.
So do you think that there's too much reliance on VAR? I mean, this has been a conversation that's been going on for decades, but now in the event of all this seemingly extra tail risk, do you think that there really now is too much reliance on VAR? There really needs to be more tools added to the toolbox, as it were?
Well, so VAR is something that we have been using for years. And if you're looking at the gas market, or if you're looking at some other, like maybe oil market and stuff, the market is pretty liquid. You can identify, there are many options traded as well. You can look at the implied volatilities. There are multiple ways of calculating a VAR in those markets. In power markets, we don't really have a liquid option market. So most of the times, most of these firms, I'm pretty sure, are going to be using a historical model for calculating VAR. It has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. What's important for a risk manager is to know how much and when to trust your VAR number and when not to trust your VAR number. Apart from VAR, there are multiple different tools that you can develop as well. We at Trailstone, we have developed a 150-page presentation that we present on a weekly basis internally. The way we got to that is by basically answering every single question that has been raised either by trader or by, let's say, executives, chief executive officers, or even external, whether it's board of directors or external investors or whatever it might be. If there is a question raised, let's try to find a way to automate that, answer that in such a way that you are going to include that in the presentation, and you're going to communicate that on a regular basis. So identifying your risk is the most important part. Quantifying your risk is another part, and communicating that specific risk is a third piece of risk management. Each one of these three pieces are extremely important, and VAR, in my opinion, is probably 1 or 2% of the entire risk package. And you really need to focus on a lot of other things apart from just VAR.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Erica, could I ask you here something? Yeah, sorry, was that Rebecca? Did you want to say something here?
Add on one quick thing to what Nitesh said, which I know that risk managers are struggling with in the aftermath of this. They've always struggled with this question, but particularly when we see an event of this magnitude happen, is even if I've got a good grip on what those outcome, or I think I have a good grip on what those outcome possibilities may be, how much can I really manage and still stay in business? Because the cost of managing risk is very much non-zero, right? So now you have to trade off with your understanding of your risk. What are the financial implications of hedging, and how far down that can you go? How far down that curve can you go and still remain competitive? And I think that's a very tough question sometimes for businesses and for the risk managers in the wake of these. Is you want the belt and suspenders, but that is certainly not free. And it can make your operation, non-competitive in the market if you go too far down the risk management trail in terms of hedge costs.
Yeah, so you mean you can be overhedged, and that's too much of a cost?
Yeah, financially overhedged. No such thing. No such thing as overhedged from a risk standpoint. But the cost of the hedges will make you uncompetitive. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Erica, could I turn to you here? And this has been touched on by everyone in the conversation so far, I think. I wanted to ask you, do you think it's now time for do we need to rethink the definition perhaps of extreme events? The extreme, I think, can apply to how severe the event is, but extreme as in not occurring very often is what you used to mean by extreme. Do you think that that's, we have to rethink these terms and really think about tail risk differently?
As far as rethinking the definition of extreme, we we experienced a problem during Uri that we experienced, here in Texas. We have very severe summers, and we've experienced over 110 degree days for many days in a summer, and so that's extreme on the other side. And so for us, our forecasts on our load aren't wide enough. We use historical data to predict future events there sometime with regards to some of that modeling, and we haven't had said extreme events which is an issue. Having said that, our stochastic modeling, has been in place for some time. We use, tools that allow us to be able to really, broaden, that fan as much as possible. But when it comes to that forecast error, that's something that we have, that we work on. But it's not something new, I would say. As far as like managing tail risk differently, we, the way we manage our tail risk, I don't know if I would say it's going to change per se. We do things maybe that's a little more, I wouldn't say it's unique. It's just maybe more traditional for our audience. So I'm public power. I can't speculate. I am in a environment in my part of the state where I have a crushing stakeholder desire to decarbonize. So I am subjected not only by the weather events that we're talking about, but by other constraints as well. So I need to be very diversified. I need to look for as many tools that will transfer risk and break down the cost of that risk. ERCOT has 195 megawatts of batteries on the system until this summer, where it's jumping to 1,300 megawatts. That's a huge jump. That's significant. So real-time co-optimization for the ERCOT market has been delayed 18 months, but this is also going to help us become more granular in how we manage the system. So point being is there's financial products out there that we use, and there's physical products out there that we use. And that self-insurance that we employ comes in a variety of ways. So we really look to try and leverage as many of those as possible, trying to take it as inexpensively as possible, but a lot of different tools in the toolbox. So, in this past February, our length had us on the right side of this extreme event. And it's how we managed our tail risk in February. Given the changes in our market and in the industry, we're looking to settlement-only distributed generation, resiliency, and/or energy as a service in order for us to augment the service territory we manage, because I am a non-opt-in entity, and partner with my customers to leverage the load side of the equation economically. So we need to look at it a lot of different ways given the constraints that we're in.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Fidos, can I ask you, are you having any increasing in conversations with clients around tail risk?
Yes, we do see that happening. And the good thing about our system is all the clients have to build their forward curves, because without forward curves, you can't you can't market your positions. And within the system itself, once you build your forward curves, we have a module which allows you to stress test and do a lot of scenario testing. The model already exists in the system. So the heavy work is obviously modeling your positions as accurately as possible and to the lowest level of granularity, building your forward curves accurately. And then once that's there, which they need to do anyway for their mark-to-market and their exposure management, then running scenarios, shifting the curve, shifting the gift points, shocking prices to look at that tail risk is a pretty easy setup in the system. So yes, we are listening to additional requests from clients, and in some cases we are also being extremely proactive to tell all of our clients that, hey, you've already bought the system, you already have your forward curves in there, you might as well start thinking about using this module if you're not using it already.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Rebecca,
let me just add, I'm sorry, Stella. I just wanted to mention one thing real quick, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but another thing to remember or of note is that after the event, we saw the forward curve go up $2 to $4. And that's about it. That was actually 10%. So it's interesting to see. And I don't know if that's because of the fact that we do have extreme weather in Texas, that we deal with, every so often or in the summers. But just a note that that really wasn't that big of a jump.
Yeah, okay. And you were talking earlier about companies and their hedges and really being aware of whether they're commercially, they're economical. Would you say that companies need to think about how they structure their hedges going forward in a different way?
Is that for me?
Yes,
no.
Yes, sorry, Rebecca.
For Rebecca, yes.
Oh, but I would say for both, because I know that, certainly it's a challenge for municipals like City of Austin that are not only operating under, all the volatility that we see in an open market, but have to comply by a whole new set of regulatory rules too. But certainly, do I see customers changing the way they hedge? I do, and I think just some of the more creative ways, like looking at the way to manage the load side of risk when you can reduce instead of hedge additional and expect the load to go up is a very interesting potential. We've seen that being used in ERCOT with the large industrials, and I think we're just going to see that keep on moving down in the food chain, so to speak. Although, certainly in terms of expectations of load shedding and utilizing that load side of the equation to manage risk, when we look at what happened with Gritty and some of the other retailers that were relying on price signals from the market to get those customers to shed load, that's the whole idea in behind some of the variable rate plans for residentials. A residential at the end of the day will not behave like a commercial or industrial customer. And I think most of my clients on the load side have to face the reality that at this point, demand side management is going to be at least not quite as flexible as what we've seen with the industrial load shedding. And, I just also want to comment that even before this event, the industrial load shedding has had such an impact on the price formation in ERCOT, up to this. And I think it has made the market not very concerned in some cases of big spikes. Thanks to ORDC mechanism, it made the market think, yes, we're going to see a very brief spike in ORDC. We're going to see a brief spike in that PML. And then what's going to happen is that load is going to drop out of places like the ship channel, and we've just seen it tank back down, right? We haven't seen these long, sustained high prices that happened during this weather event. And I think that the market got a little bit desensitized to what happens when we see $9,000 for 3 days, right? So, certainly I think folks are going to get more creative, but there are some things we need better technology to lean on. The mention of the battery technology coming up at ERCOT is great too. I think that's really going to help in terms of an option for hedging.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So we're coming towards the end now, but I wanted to put one more question to each of you. And this was actually something that Mitesh came up with while we were talking before the call. And I thought this would be a really good way to end off. So, we've concentrated on the Texas freeze. We've looked at COVID. We're all aware of, lots of things that we hadn't expected are now perhaps possibilities. So I wanted to ask each of you, what are you keeping an eye out for next? What's the next big black swan that might be lurking around the corner? So, Erica, could I ask you that first, please? What are you most concerned about?
What am I most concerned about? I'll be honest with you. I'm not concerned. I think that, I guess, so let me restate that. Legislature isn't closed yet. They haven't finished. They're probably going to go into special session. So, I am concerned that people are going to take their poor risk management practices and try and resolve them in the state legislature. And then we're going to all have to pay for it. So that's a huge concern for me. If there's players that aren't prepared and, can't manage their risk well, then they shouldn't be in the market. I think the energy only market there is some risk there on how it's constructed. I'm a huge proponent of the energy only market. But I do think we need that there could be some further, we are applying further attention, but there are places for improvement, some weaknesses there that where we could try and see if this actually, this science project kind of, gets pulled off. But other than that, I would say, I guess maybe it's our legislature, because when it gets political, it's all bets are off. I mean, it's who you know, and it's, how loud am I going to scream, and how much backing do I have? And, the people that ended up, working hard and doing well and are a slice of the pie, they're the ones that end up helping pick up the tab. So, we're happy to help, but we don't want it to be unreasonable.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mitesh, what are your thoughts?
Well, as far as a prop trading firm is concerned, I'm always nervous. I'm always concerned about what's gonna, cause volatility in the market tomorrow, whether it's weather, whether it's, a second wave of COVID-19 or maybe third wave of COVID-19, or what's going to happen to the demand picture, what's going to happen to the supply picture, what's going to happen to the LNG picture in China or maybe in Europe. That's going to have an impact on Henry Hub or even on TTF and NBP in Europe, etc. So there's a lot of different things that you're always constantly keeping an eye on. Information, like most of the panelists mentioned, is extremely important. You got to be able to have the information coming in on a regular basis, identifying what matters, what doesn't matter to your company and to the positions that you hold. Screening the positions, identifying the risks that it might cause based on the information that you're going to be receiving. Stress testing as well. I mean, I'm a big believer of stress testing, but it's important to stress test your portfolio correctly. If you're stressing your portfolio up, down 20%, what's going to happen to your portfolio? Probably not. It's garbage in, garbage out, in my opinion. So it's important to identify how to stress your portfolio accurately, to identify, because it's a micro market. What's happened in ERCOT didn't really move a needle in PJM or New York or California for that matter. Versus if you're looking at oil market, it's a global market. If something happens in Iraq or Iran, it's going to have an impact on the United States as well. So when you are trading micro markets, it's important to identify what's going to drive risk, especially in that specific market, and how can I better stress my portfolio given the situation that could happen. And then thirdly, if in case something is really bothering me, I need to identify a way to quantify that appropriately and be able to sell that not only externally, but at the same time internally, such that traders don't come to me and be like, it's garbage, I don't believe it, I still like my position, I'm going to be in it. It's important to communicate that, build that trust, build that rapport with your traders, with your internal counterparties, to make sure that the risk management team and the foundation that you're building for your company is strong and it's trustworthy, not only externally, but at the same time internally as well.
Yes, yeah. Okay, thank you. Rebecca, what are your thoughts there? What are you on the lookout for next?
I would certainly agree wholeheartedly with Erica that one of our biggest concerns and our clients' biggest concerns is bad regulation, or the threat of re-regulating something that fundamentally, as a whole, as a market, works and provides great results for consumers because of an outlier event. And we can plan for that event, but to totally re-regulate or to push those regulations in a direction that prevents companies from participating in an open market will do no favors for us in the long run. That's probably my biggest concern. And I'd say my second biggest concern is just because we work with so many cross-border clients, this was a rough patch with our biggest trading partner. I think that for natural gas producers in Texas, that pipeline to Mexico for up to 5.5 BCF a day is critical for their finances. So it's not just about taking care of our neighbor, it's about taking care of our U.S. gas producers as well. So I think we can overcome the hurdle that this has put in front of our gas exports to Mexico. But certainly I'm concerned a little about the long-term impacts of that, of what happened politically when we have a Texas governor saying that he wants to shut up our exports.
Yeah, thank you. Robert, have you got anything you'd like to add there?
Well, I'd just like to bring up that, our black swan is, we're already facing it as of last Friday. So, we are a multi-commodity platform. We have customers, in liquids in North America, and they're facing the reality of the Colonial Pipeline being down and what that does, not only for delivery of refined products into New York, but also what does it do for crude deliveries into the Gulf Coast, because they're shutting down units. Motiva announced that they're going to shut down a few units at their big refinery in Louisiana, and it has a trickle-on effect And all of a sudden, so much of this stuff is just in time delivered and produced that when all of a sudden you shut off the big pipeline, everything behind it backs up, and now you got to find other places to put that crude that may have been going to that refinery that was going to be refined and set down the pipe, right? So we're ready. Yeah. Our customers are already dealing with the next black swan. They moved on from the freeze. Now they're worried about cyber hacking of pipelines, right?
Yes. Okay. And Firdaus, would you like to add anything? Any final thoughts?
I think the panelists have touched on all the different, the key topics. For us, again, our focus is our clients. We need to make sure we are trying to ensure that clients have modeled their data accurately in the system, that they model it at the correct level of granularity. They're staying on top of the data every single day, all throughout the day, and that they're utilizing all the tools in the risk management toolkit. As Mitesh said, there's a ton of stuff. VAR is not the panacea. It's not the cure for all evils. So our focus is definitely from a product standpoint is make sure you have all your data modeled accurately. It's at the lowest level of granularity. You're staying on top of it, and you're using every possible tool in your risk management toolkit, because you never know what the next extreme event could be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, we've just reached our time now, so unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much to our 5 panelists for giving your time and your expert insights there. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for watching.
Thank you.